My son-in-law's hand connected with my face before I could process what was happening. The dinner plate slipped from my fingers and shattered across the marble floor, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. "You're nothing without my money," Cole Weston had snarled just seconds before, his breath hot with expensive wine and pure contempt. My cheek burned where his palm had struck, but something else burned hotter inside me. Something I'd been swallowing for 3 years while living under his roof, pretending not to notice how my daughter Ivy flinched at his voice, how she'd stopped calling me by Sunday afternoons, how the light had drained from her eyes month by month. That slap didn't break me. It woke me up. And by the time Cole Weston realized his mistake, I'd already made one phone call that would cost him everything he'd stolen, every lie he'd told, and the empire he'd built on other people's suffering. This was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The argument started over something small, like they always did in Cole's house. A cracked vase, I think, though honestly, it could have been anything. Cole needed reasons to assert his power, and any reason would do. He slammed his crystal wine glass down so hard the stem cracked, red wine bleeding across the white tablecloth. "You should be grateful we even let you live here, Caroline," he said, his voice cold and cutting. I froze mid-bite, my fork suspended over the salmon. Ivy sat between us, her eyes flickering back and forth like she was watching a tennis match she desperately wanted to end. Then Cole leaned forward across the table, his designer suit catching the chandelier light, and smirked with all the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "You're nothing without my money." The words hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds before his hand shot across the table and cracked against my face with enough force to snap my head sideways. The plate shattered on the floor, and with it, the last piece of my silence. I stood in the guest bathroom mirror for 20 minutes, watching the red handprint on my cheek slowly darken into something that would bruise by morning. My hands gripped the marble countertop until my knuckles went white, but I wasn't crying. I was thinking, calculating, planning. Ivy knocked softly on the door, that apologetic little tap she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. "Mom, please," her voice trembled. "He didn't mean it. He's under so much stress with the business expansion." I opened the door and looked at my daughter. When had she become so small? This wasn't the confident woman who'd graduated top of her class from business school. This was a shadow wearing my daughter's face. "Ivy," I whispered, choosing my words carefully because I knew he was probably listening. "This isn't love. This isn't what your father and I taught you." She turned away, her shoulders hunching inward. "He said you'd say that. He said you'd try to turn me against him." That night, I decided to leave, but fate had other plans. My suitcase sat packed by the guest room door the next morning, everything I'd brought to this house folded neatly inside. 3 years of living as a guest in my own daughter's home, watching her disappear piece by piece, and I'd finally had enough. But when I reached for the door handle, it wouldn't turn. Locked from the outside. I tried the balcony doors next. Also locked. Every exit from the guest wing had been secured overnight while I slept. Cole's voice drifted up from the living room below, casual and cheerful. "She's not going anywhere until I say so, sweetheart. Your mother needs to learn some respect for the people who provide for her." The humiliation burned hotter than fear in my chest. I wasn't some prisoner in a crime drama. I was a 64-year-old retired school principal who'd raised a daughter alone, who'd commanded respect from hundreds of students and teachers. Yet here I stood, locked in a guest room like a disobedient child. I sat on the bed and waited, forcing my breathing to stay calm. Panic was what he wanted. Control was what I needed. That night, while they slept, I found something in his office drawer that made my blood run cold. Cole had left his home office door unlocked, probably never imagining I'd have the nerve to enter his private domain. The moonlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows gave me just enough light to see by. His desk was organized with military precision, every paper stacked perfectly. But it was the bottom drawer that called to me, the one with a small lock that looked almost decorative. I'd learned to pick locks during my years as a principal, dealing with stuck filing cabinets. This one took me less than 3 minutes. Inside was a manila folder labeled in Cole's precise handwriting, Ward House. That was my home. The house where I'd raised Ivy alone after my husband died of cancer 25 years ago. The house my parents had left me, the only real asset I owned. Inside were documents I could barely comprehend. Transfer papers, forged signatures, legal agreements moving the deed into Cole's company name. My family home was being stolen, and the theft was already halfway complete. I realized then, this wasn't just cruelty. It was a calculated plan. When dawn painted the sky gray and pink, I forced myself to act normal. I made coffee in the enormous kitchen with its marble countertops. Cole left early for what he called a business meeting, barely glancing at me. "Stay put today, Caroline," he said, not making it a question. "Ivy needs help organizing the charity gala." But Ivy was still asleep, exhausted from another night of walking on eggshells. The moment Cole's Mercedes disappeared down the driveway, I grabbed my purse, stuffed the stolen folder inside, and walked out the front door with nothing but my dignity and evidence of his crimes. The bus ride into town felt endless, every stop reminding me how far I'd fallen. But every mile away from that mansion felt like breathing again after being underwater. By the time I reached my old friend Myra's little blue house on Oak Street, I wasn't crying anymore. I was plotting revenge. Myra listened in complete silence while I told her everything. When I finished, she simply stood up and handed me her cell phone. "You need to call Detective Marcus Harris. He's retired now, but he's sharp. He owes me a favor." I dialed, my hands surprisingly steady. He answered on the second ring. "Harris speaking." I took a breath. "Detective, my name is Caroline Ward, and I need your help bringing down a thief." Detective Marcus Harris met me at a small diner called Rosie's on the edge of town, the kind of place with vinyl booths and waitresses who'd worked there for 30 years. He was older than I remembered, maybe 70 now, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. He slid into the booth and immediately pushed a thin folder toward me. "Cole Weston," he said without preamble. "I've been watching that man for 2 years. Tax fraud, identity manipulation, shell companies. He's smart, covers his tracks better than most white-collar criminals I've seen." I blinked in shock. "Then why hasn't he been arrested?" Harris leaned back and sighed. "Because being smart and being provable are two different things. He always has someone else's name on the paperwork. Always has a fall guy ready. Right now, that fall guy is your daughter." My heart stopped. "Ivy?
She's not involved."
She doesn't even know about his business practices." Harris's expression softened. "Maybe not consciously. But she's been signing documents for 3 years, Caroline. Her name is on half his shell companies. If I bring charges tomorrow, she goes down with him." The coffee mug shook in my trembling hands. Harris smiled faintly. "You ready to play along, Caroline?" 3 weeks later, I returned to Cole's mansion with my tail between my legs, or at least that's what I wanted him to think. I'd rehearsed my performance carefully with Detective Harris, practicing the defeated slump of my shoulders, the tremor in my voice. Cole opened the door himself, probably because he dismissed the household staff to savor his victory privately. "Knew you'd come to your senses," he said, not even trying to hide his smugness. "That little apartment was pretty pathetic, wasn't it?" I nodded meekly, staring at the floor.
"I'm sorry you overreacted."
"You were right. I am nothing without your support." The lie tasted like acid, but I forced it out. For the next 2 months, I played my role perfectly. I cooked their meals, smiled at Cole's little cruelties, and acted like the grateful dependent he wanted me to be. But I watched everything. Every document he signed at breakfast. Every phone call he took in his office. Every lie he told Ivy about business trips and charity donations. And I photographed everything, sending it all to Detective Harris's encrypted email address. I was feeding him rope, and Cole was hanging himself with it. Cole Weston was a man who thrived on control. He liked when Ivy jumped to answer his calls, when I flinched at his raised voice, when everyone understood exactly who held the power. So I stopped flinching. I stopped reacting to his provocations entirely. I became smooth and pleasant and utterly unreadable, and it drove him absolutely insane. "You're different," he said one evening, studying me across the dinner table. "What are you up to, Caroline?" I met his eyes calmly and smiled. "I'm not up to anything, Cole. I'm just trying to be grateful for everything you've done for me." His jaw clenched. "You're lying. You're planning something." I took a delicate sip of water. Maybe I learned from the best. Ivy's fork clattered against her plate, her eyes wide with panic. But I kept smiling, kept my voice level and sweet. Because his paranoia was becoming my greatest weapon. Every day he spent wondering what I was planning was a day he made mistakes, got sloppy, showed his true colors. Detective Harris had taught me that anxious criminals make errors, and I was making Cole Weston very anxious indeed. His unraveling had begun. Cole announced he was leaving for a week-long business trip to Seattle, something about securing investors. Ivy accepted this without question, helping him pack and kissing him goodbye. But Detective Harris called that same evening, his voice tight with excitement. "He's not going to Seattle. I've got eyes on him heading to an industrial warehouse 2 towns over. Whatever he's doing there, it's not legitimate business." I grabbed my old camera and drove carefully to the address Harris texted me. The warehouse sat at the edge of an abandoned industrial park, the kind of place where nobody asks questions. I parked 3 blocks away and walked quietly through the darkness. Through a grimy window, I could see Cole meeting with 3 men I recognized from news reports. Corporate fraud cases, tax evasion rings, money laundering schemes. They were spreading documents across a folding table. I raised my camera and started shooting, the quiet click lost in the distance between us. Then one of the men looked up, his eyes scanning the window, and his gaze locked directly onto mine. For a frozen second, we stared at each other. Then he shouted something, and the warehouse door crashed open. I ran. My 64-year-old knees screamed in protest, my lungs burned, but terror gave me speed I didn't know I still possessed. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me. A truck door slammed. An engine roared to life. "Stop. Hey, stop right there." The voice was closer than I wanted. I ducked into a narrow alley between 2 abandoned buildings, pressing myself flat behind garbage bins. The truck rolled past slowly, spotlight sweeping across the alley entrance, missing me by inches. I stayed frozen until dawn began to lighten the sky, until I was certain they'd given up. My phone buzzed with a text from Harris, marked urgent. "Get to the station now." When I stumbled through the police station doors 2 hours later, still trembling and smelling like garbage, Harris took one look at me and said, "Did you get the photos?" I nodded. "Then we've got enough to start building the case." But Cole wasn't done playing. That evening, my phone rang with Ivy's number, but I barely recognized her voice through her sobs. "Mom, what did you do?" "Cole says you stole from him. He showed me bank alerts, withdrawals with your name on them." My heart clenched painfully. Of course. Of course Cole had a backup plan. "Ivy, sweetheart, he's framing me. Whatever he showed you, it's fake. He's trying to discredit me before I can expose what he's really doing." She was crying too hard to listen. "I can't believe you'd do this to us. After everything he's done for you. How could you?" The line went dead before I could explain. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on Myra's door with authoritative pounding. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch with a warrant for my arrest. "Caroline Ward, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Cole had filed charges, complete with fabricated evidence. As they led me to the patrol car in handcuffs, I saw Myra frantically calling Detective Harris. But for the moment, I was going to jail. I spent 2 nights in a holding cell that smelled like disinfectant and despair. The fluorescent lights never turned off completely. Every minute felt like an hour. The headlines started appearing on television by morning. "Retired principal arrested for embezzling from son-in-law." The news anchors delivered the story with that particular tone of disappointment reserved for people who should have known better. On the afternoon of the second day, Cole came to visit me. The guard led me to the visitor area, where we sat separated by scratched plexiglass.
Cole was smiling.
Actually smiling. He picked up his phone and waited. "You should have stayed in your place, Caroline," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You could have lived comfortably, been taken care of. But you had to be ungrateful. You had to think you were smarter than me." I leaned forward, close enough to see my reflection in the plexiglass. "And you should have stayed out of mine," I said quietly, calmly. "Because I'm not done yet, Cole." What Cole didn't know was that Detective Harris had been recording every word. What he didn't know was that Harris had spent those 2 days compiling every photograph I'd taken, cross-referencing them with financial records, building an airtight case. The next morning, Harris arrived with a folder full of evidence that made the duty sergeant's face go pale. Audio of Cole bragging about framing me. Financial data tying him to the forged deed. Photographs from the warehouse showing him with known criminals. Within 2 hours, all charges against me were dropped. By afternoon, I was standing outside the jail in the sunshine, blinking at the cluster of reporters who'd somehow learned about the reversal. The camera flashes went off. Microphones thrust toward me. "Mrs. Ward, how does it feel to be cleared? What do you want to say to Cole Weston?" I looked directly into the nearest camera, shoulders straight, and spoke in the clear principal's voice I'd used to address school assemblies for 30 years. "The truth always pays its bills. And Mr. Weston's bill is coming due." By evening, that clip had been viewed 300,000 times online. The headline now read, "Caroline Ward exposes local tycoon's web of lies." Cole's carefully constructed empire began crumbling like a sandcastle in the tide. His investors started calling emergency meetings. Business partners quietly removed their names from joint ventures. The country club where he'd held court for years suddenly had a waiting list. Ivy's social media went dark. No more photos of charity galas. Just silence. But I knew Cole wasn't the type to surrender. He was the type to burn everything down rather than admit defeat. And when he made that move, I'd be ready. Detective Harris pulled me aside after the press conference and whispered something that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. "We found another account. Hidden offshore under shell companies, but guess whose name is on the paperwork as the primary owner?" I looked at him with dawning horror. "Ivy's." Harris nodded grimly. "She's been his shield for years, Caroline. And if we move now without her cooperation, she goes to prison too." I had one last ace to play, but it meant convincing my daughter to betray her husband. I met Ivy in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, neutral territory. She arrived 20 minutes late, her designer sunglasses covering what I suspected were dark circles. When she finally sat down, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 months. "I can't stay long," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Cole doesn't know I'm here." I slid a folder across the table. "Your name is on bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, Ivy. Shell companies doing business in 6 countries. Tax fraud, money laundering, identity theft." The forensic accountant traced it all. She opened the folder with shaking hands, her face going progressively paler. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Tears spilled down her cheeks, dripping onto the papers that proved her husband had used her as a human shield for years. He just put papers in front of me to sign. He said it was normal business stuff. He said I needed to trust him. I reached across the table and took her hand, the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I know. But if Detective Harris files charges tomorrow without your cooperation, you'll go to prison alongside Cole. You'll lose everything." Her voice cracked. "What do I have to do?" We spent 3 days planning with Detective Harris, going over every detail until Ivy could recite her role in her sleep. She would invite Cole to a special dinner at the mansion, a reconciliation. She would tell him I'd left town permanently, that his legal troubles were overblown media hysteria, that she believed in him completely. And she would get him to talk. Cole accepted the invitation eagerly, probably seeing it as confirmation that his control remained absolute. He arrived that Friday evening in a new Italian suit, carrying expensive flowers and wearing the smile of a man who thought he'd won. I was hidden in the basement wine cellar with Harris and 2 officers, watching through tiny cameras Ivy had helped us install. The audio was crystal clear. Ivy served his favorite meal and poured his favorite wine, a Bordeaux that cost $400 a bottle. Cole relaxed immediately, leaning back like a king surveying his kingdom. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he said, cutting into a steak. "Your mother was poison, trying to turn you against me. But we're stronger than her lies, aren't we?" Ivy's smile didn't reach her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. Cole was 3 glasses deep into the wine when he really started talking, his guard dropping with every sip. Ivy asked gentle questions, playing the devoted wife perfectly, and he answered with the arrogance of someone who thought he was untouchable. "The offshore accounts were brilliant," he bragged, gesturing with his wine glass. "Your name on everything means I'm protected. Even if they somehow build a case, you're the one on paper." In the win. The room in the wine cellar went completely silent. Senator Gray was a state official with a reputation for fighting financial corruption. If Cole was telling the truth, we'd just uncovered something far bigger than one man's fraud. Detective Harris caught my eye, and I saw the same thought reflected there. We'd stumbled into a massive conspiracy. Ivy swallowed hard and pushed forward. "Should I be worried about that detective who arrested Mom?" Cole waved dismissively. "Harris is retired. Nobody takes him seriously." That's when the dining room door burst open and Detective Harris walked in, flanked by 3 uniformed officers and a federal agent. Cole's fork froze halfway to his mouth, his face cycling through confusion, then understanding, then pure rage. "Cole Weston, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit tax evasion, and assault," Harris said. "You have the right to remain silent, but based on the last hour of conversation, I don't think you're very good at that." The color drained from Cole's face as they pulled his hands behind his back and snapped on handcuffs. He looked at Ivy with disbelief. "You set me up? You actually set me up?" Ivy stood from the table, trembling but steady. "You hit my mother. You stole her house. You used me as a shield. What did you think was going to happen?" Cole's face twisted with fury as they started leading him toward the door. He turned back to look at me as I emerged from the basement stairs, and for a moment I saw raw hatred in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this is over?" I walked right up to him, close enough to see the wine stain on his expensive collar. "No, Cole," I said quietly. "I think you've lost. There's a difference." Cole started talking in custody, and once he started, he couldn't stop. Fear does that to men who've never faced real consequences. He threw Senator Gray under the bus first, providing names, dates, account numbers, everything he could think of to negotiate a better plea deal. Then he started naming other business associates, other corrupt officials, other people in his network. Detective Harris called me 3 days after the arrest, his voice carrying exhaustion and satisfaction. "You just helped us bring down an entire corruption ring, Caroline. Federal prosecutors are already drawing up indictments. This goes way bigger than one stolen property deed." I sat in Myra's living room with the phone pressed to my ear, trying to process the magnitude of what had started with a single slap. "What happens to Ivy?" I asked. That was all I really cared about. Harris's voice softened. "She's cooperating fully. Between her testimony and the recordings, she'll likely face probation at most. She was a victim of manipulation, and the prosecutors see that." I closed my eyes and let relief wash over me. But when I opened them again, I saw something on Myra's coffee table that made my heart stop. An envelope addressed to me in Ivy's handwriting, delivered while I'd been at the police station. Inside was a single-page note. The note was short, written in Ivy's neat handwriting. "Mom, I need time to heal. I love you more than anything, but I have to figure out who I am without him, without the mansion, without the life I thought I wanted. I'm going to stay with Aunt Rachel in Portland for a while. Please don't be angry. I'll call when I'm ready." Her words broke something in me that Cole's slap never had. The tears came then, hot and fast, mourning not for what I'd lost but for what my daughter needed to lose to find herself again. Myra sat beside me and held my hand, saying nothing. "She'll come back," Myra finally said. "But she needs to come back as herself, not as his wife or your daughter. Just as Ivy." I understood. Sometimes healing looks like distance. Sometimes love means letting someone go. That night, I went through Ivy's old room in my stolen house, the one Cole had almost succeeded in taking from me. I found photo albums from her childhood, report cards I'd saved, Mother's Day cards she'd made with construction paper and glitter. And hidden in her old jewelry box, I found something that changed everything again. The jewelry box was white ceramic with pink flowers, something she'd picked out at a craft fair when she was 12. Inside, beneath old friendship bracelets and a broken watch, I found a small silver key attached to a paper tag in Ivy's handwriting. The tag read simply, "Backup," with an address in Cole's office building downtown. My hands shook as I drove to the building the next morning, using the key to access Cole's private office that hadn't been sealed yet by investigators. The key fit a small drawer built into the side of his mahogany desk, so cleverly concealed I never would have found it without knowing exactly where to look. Inside was a USB drive in a protective case. I took it home and plugged it into my laptop with dread. The files were organized by date, going back 4 years. Video recordings, audio files, documents. I clicked on the first video and watched Cole coaching Ivy on how to be properly obedient to her husband. I watched him mock my husband's cancer death, calling him weak for dying. I watched him forge my signature on the property deed, laughing about how easy it was to steal from old people. Every file was evidence. Every recording was proof. And Ivy had been collecting it all, waiting for the right moment to use it. I called Detective Harris immediately, and within hours, the files were in the hands of federal prosecutors. But I had a different plan for the most damning recordings. I contacted the same news channel that had branded me a thief 2 months earlier, the one whose reporters had thrust microphones in my face. I handed them the USB drive with one condition: they had to air everything unedited. The story broke on a Tuesday evening during primetime news. The anchor's face was grave as she introduced the segment. "Tonight, we bring you exclusive footage that reveals the truth behind the Caroline Ward case and exposes a pattern of abuse and manipulation that fooled an entire community." They played Cole's voice mocking my dead husband. They showed him coaching Ivy to obey like a trained dog. They aired his bragging about stealing my house, about manipulating Senator Gray, about using my daughter as a legal shield while treating her like property. Within an hour, the videos had gone viral across every social media platform. Within 3 hours, the district attorney announced additional charges including domestic abuse, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit perjury. By midnight, my phone was flooded with messages from people who'd believed Cole's lies, apologizing for doubting me. But I wasn't thinking about vindication or revenge anymore. I was thinking about my daughter, watching these videos in Portland, seeing her husband's true nature exposed to the entire world. Ivy came home 4 months later, and I almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd cut her long hair into a short, practical style. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of designer clothes. But it was her eyes that showed the biggest change. They were clear again, present, alive in a way they hadn't been since before she married Cole. She stood on my front porch, the porch of the house that was legally mine again, and just looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, holding on like she was drowning, and I was solid ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not believing you, for choosing him, for being too weak to see what was happening." I held her tight and shook my head. "You weren't weak. You were manipulated by someone who made manipulation into an art form. There's a difference." We went inside and talked for hours, the kind of deep conversation we hadn't had in years. She told me about therapy, about learning to recognize the patterns of abuse she'd normalized, about slowly rebuilding her sense of self. That evening, she asked if we could visit her father's grave together. We drove to the cemetery as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. At my husband's headstone, Ivy knelt down and placed fresh flowers, touching his name carved in granite. "I'm sorry I forgot who I was, Daddy," she said softly. The wind carried the smell of rain, and peace felt real again. We were walking back to the car when Ivy stopped suddenly and turned to face me, her expression serious and determined. She pulled a folder from her bag, the kind of legal folder I'd become far too familiar with. "Mom, There's something I need to give you. Inside were property deeds, transfer papers, legal documents signed and notarized. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at, and when I did, my vision blurred with tears. I used the money from selling Cole's cars and some other assets he'd put in my name, Ivy explained, her voice thick with emotion. I bought back our old family home, the one Grandma and Grandpa left you. The one Cole tried to steal. I stared at the papers in my shaking hands, at the address where I'd raised my daughter, where my husband had taught her to ride a bike, where we'd celebrated ordinary Tuesdays that turned out to be anything but ordinary. Ivy, this must have cost. It cost exactly what it was worth, she interrupted firmly. It cost me everything from that life, and I'm glad.
That house is your legacy, Mom.
Not his. Not mine. Yours. We stood there in the cemetery parking lot as the sun disappeared below the horizon, holding the deeds to a house that meant so much more than property value or square footage. It represented survival, family, the strength it takes to fight for what's right even when you're terrified. Cole Weston was serving 12 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and a list of other charges that filled 3 pages. Senator Gray had resigned in disgrace. 8 other business associates had been indicted, creating a scandal that dominated news cycles for weeks. But those victories felt distant compared to the sound of Ivy laughing in the kitchen, making pancakes the way her father used to, slightly burned around the edges, because she always got distracted. She'd enrolled in community college to finish the business degree she'd abandoned when Cole convinced her she didn't need to work. I'd gone back to substitute teaching, finding joy in the classroom chaos I'd missed during my years in Cole's mansion. The students didn't care that I'd been on the news. They just cared that I listened when they talked and believed in them when they struggled. On a quiet Sunday morning 6 months after Ivy returned, we sat on the porch of our family home drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. A young couple walked past with a stroller. An old man watered his roses. Normal life, the kind Cole Weston had tried to steal from us. Mom, Ivy said suddenly, setting down her coffee mug. I start my new job tomorrow. Marketing manager at a nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the woman she'd become. Strong.
Clear-eyed.
Purposeful. Your father would be so proud, I whispered. She took my hand. He'd be proud of both of us. And sitting there in the morning sun, on the porch of the house that had been stolen and reclaimed, I finally understood what victory really meant. It wasn't about revenge or justice or even vindication. It was about the moment when you realize you've survived the worst someone could do to you, and you're still standing, still fighting, still here. Cole Weston had said I was nothing without his money, but I'd proven something far more important. I was everything without his cruelty.